Previously on Crime Adjacent. On Friday night, December 15th, 2023, Daniel Palmer Jr. found Margie Miller just outside his front gate. This was after I left my hideout spot to go confront Molly about why she was inside the Palmer house. This was also, apparently, after Cheryl Montrose left, and even after Molly herself left after her shift ended. Daniel Palmer told Chief Williams that he was worried about security. He wanted to be sure the gate was closed and the house was locked tight for the night. There was a killer out there, after all. And so he strolled out into the late-night quiet air to the front gate, and that's where he heard it. A groan. Not at the gate, but a few yards away, in some bushes a few yards from the driveway. Palmer called a few security guards over, and they inspected the area and found Margie. She'd been attacked and left just outside the gate. And she was alive. No one saw a thing, or heard a thing. This is the official story, anyway. But honestly, how was that even possible? There was security everywhere. All hell broke loose. Police, ambulances, even more security. Williams said the security did a full perimeter check and found a spot on a berm overlooking the house, like a deer rest. Top-notch security would find this. Someone with training. I would have noticed. I should have noticed. Clearly I was getting rusty. Williams said they took shoe prints, and wouldn't you know it, someone with shoes exactly like mine was out there. Like I said, rusty. It turns out, when Williams confronted me at Molly's house that night, he did, indeed, want to arrest me. He even tried to take my shoes. Fortunately, Nikki has a great team of lawyers on hand. I try not to ask about the cost, but I handed my phone over to Williams. He tried to get a word in, but merely listened to a string of words I could make out from even a few steps away. Reasonably articulable suspicion, warrants, lawsuits, due process, civil rights, the whole works. It was worth whatever that phone call cost. Williams grumpily handed me my phone and said I was free to go. But honestly, I was confused. I turned the tables on Williams and asked why I had suddenly come under suspicion. Shouldn't he be focusing on Daniel Palmer, the guy who found the bodies of Tommy Coulee and Bobby Calvin in the 1990s, the guy who found Gary Pugh on Monday, the guy who just found Margie Miller outside his own home? Why was I the bad guy here? I said, "Chief, you have to know that people in this town think the police are covering up for the Palmers," and he cut me off. Williams said, "No comment," and then he walked away in a huff. The cops all wheeled out of the court, probably to the hospital. I wondered if I should go there myself. Would Molly even want me there? Didn't I just accuse her of basically being a liar in league with the Palmers? My phone buzzed again. Winnie, I had forgotten. The tokens. She had a lead on the tokens. Here's the story. But first, do you want special behind-the-scenes access to this podcast? Check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/crimeadjacent for weekly updates about the show. I'd love to connect and answer any questions you might have. From San Francisco, this is Crime Adjacent, the never-ending true crime story told weekly. I'm Chase Patrick. Winnie told me to meet her the following morning, Saturday, December 16th, 2023, at Bob Coulee's house in Ridgewood, the retirement community. A source had agreed to talk to us about the tokens that the killer was taking, but only in person and only with a few conditions that Winnie said she'd tell me about when I arrived. I was excited, yes. This was a big break. And yet, at the same time, Margie's assault gnawed at me. This had to be a copycat, right? Someone trying to mislead the investigation, throw police off the track. Killers, and serial killers in particular, are often narcissists who think they're the smartest people in every room, and they do, indeed, hatch wild schemes and attempts to distract police. It happens all the time. The Mansion Murders podcast detailed the case of Darren Wint, who set a house ablaze in 2015 to cover up the torture and murders of 4 people for cash. During the torture, but before the fire, he must have gotten the munchies. It's hard work to torture people, I guess, because he ordered a pizza to the house. And then, after the fire, he was captured through DNA left behind on a pizza box. The podcast Morbid revealed the long, strange story of Los Angeles police detective Stephanie Lazarus, who staged a robbery gone wrong to kill the woman, Sherry Rasmussen, who had married her ex. Lazarus was free and clear for years. Her scheme worked. For a while, anyway. It took decades and a secret squad of investigators to finally nail Lazarus through DNA testing. Crime Junkie dug super deep into the sad, strange, bizarre case of Susan Powell, who was thought to have been murdered by her husband, Josh, in 2009, but is still, technically, listed as missing. I don't want to sidetrack this story too much, but you should definitely go listen to that case. Long story short, Josh said he up and decided to take his kids on a camping trip in the middle of winter, in the middle of a blizzard, in the middle of the night, and no, he didn't know where his missing wife was. He was camping. One of the kids later told police that Susan was, however, with the family during the start of this alleged impromptu camping trip, but did not return home with them. It was, as the kids say, sus. The case dragged on. Susan was never found. Josh was never charged. A custody battle ensued. Susan's family actually won custody. Josh was supposed to have visiting hours with his kids while a court-appointed officer was present. But at one visit in 2012, he ushered the kids inside his house, locked the door behind him so the court-appointed officer couldn't follow, and then he set off some type of explosion, killing himself and his children. Again, go check out Crime Junkie for all the details. It's one of the most bizarre cases I've ever heard. Which is all to say, true crime has grown accustomed to bizarre cases like these and the strange, unbelievable stories murderers offer to throw police off the track. But Detective Jones and Chief Williams both agreed. Detectives are not born yesterday. They, too, studied these cases. They know all the ways killers try to elude capture. They thought the killer of Michelle Diaz was obviously doing the same thing by dumping her body in the exact same spot where the Zodiac murdered picnickers. And in fact, yes, they did indeed wonder whether a copycat was at work in 2023 with the rest stop murders. They wondered, was someone trying to use the rest stop killer to divert attention away from the most obvious motive in the world? Money. Greed. Did someone murder Gary Pugh and then assault Margie Miller half to death for financial gain while trying to pin the crimes on a supposedly re-emerged serial killer? Jones said most murders come down to either sex, drugs, or money. Was that what this was? Money? But there was one major hitch in the copycat theory, something they simply couldn't account for. Jones said there's just no possibility that anyone besides the rest stop killer and the police would have known to take that stupid token from Gary and Margie. Even Daniel Palmer and Cheryl Montrose, with all their millions and billions, couldn't pry this information out of the investigation. No way, Jones said. She was sure of it. And now, if Winnie was right, we were about to find out what that token was. I pulled into Bob's driveway and studied the house. It was early, but the house seemed alive. I could see people moving behind the curtains inside. The house practically vibrated with anticipation. This was it. Bob, who was either high on too much coffee or excitement, pulled me into the house and eagerly led me into the living room where I saw Winnie and another person. I've mentioned this before, but it's important. Winnie and Bob Coulee and Detective Jones have all stayed in touch for decades, ever since the first murder of Tommy Coulee. A long, long time ago, when Winnie was a new beat reporter, she promised Bob she would do everything to ensure Tommy was not forgotten. Even decades later, Winnie wrote regular stories about the murders to keep the memories of Tommy and the two Bobbies alive. She said, maybe, just maybe, someone out there will remember and a story will jog free some memory that helps crack this case. 1 year became another, and now, there we were, in Bob's living room, with potentially the first big break in years. Winnie sat on a yellow recliner. Bob offered me a spot on a worn brown leather couch opposite the fireplace where a framed photo of his boy, Tommy, sat on the mantel. Bob paced the room, too nervous to sit. But like I said, there was someone else with us. I need to do some housekeeping here when it comes to the protection of anonymous sources, something both Winnie and I hold dear. All I can say, even now, is that this person works in some capacity for the city. They demanded anonymity. I cannot, to this day or ever, confirm any details about them other than to say they listened to the show and were a fan. Parasocial relationships for the win, I guess. Yay, internet. So they agreed to talk, hoping Winnie and I might put the information to good use. However, there was one other stipulation besides anonymity. Both Winnie and I had to agree not to publish any information about the tokens, anywhere, ever, until the killer had been captured. If word got out, the killer could simply ditch the tokens, like the Night Stalker Richard Ramirez ditched his shoes, and police would no longer be able to link the murderer to all of the killings. Bob Coulee helped arrange this meeting, and he too agreed to these stipulations. Although he isn't a journalist or a podcaster, he also doesn't want anything to derail the capture of his son's killer. In fact, he more or less threatened our very lives if we ever published the information before the killer was captured. Okay, housekeeping over with. Here's what we learned. The person with us that Saturday morning in Bob's living room started, asking us to go first and say what we knew about the tokens. It wasn't much. Everyone knew the killer took something from the clothing of Tommy and the two Bobbies, but that was pretty much it. To their credit, Ridgewood police had indeed managed to keep this a secret for decades. Just a handful of cops, along with the county DA and 2 DA investigators and 2 more attorneys in the office, knew the full secret. But that was it. No leaks, ever. The person with us nodded. All of this was correct. We waited. Winnie shifted on her recliner. Bob paced. I could practically sense he wanted to shout, "What are they?" The person picked their words carefully. They told us the distinction between trophies and souvenirs. Trophies are something a killer takes from victims and likes to display, like, well, a trophy. They'll often give trophies like jewelry to family members in order to not just remember the murders on a daily basis, but to also get some perverse sense of power and control. They were in charge, and the trophies proved it. A 2024 study by Megan Walter looked at more than 750 sexual homicides and trophy-taking, concluding these types of tokens are meant as a reminder of the killer's skill. They're a token of perverse success in a way. Trevor Hardy, the Beast of Manchester, who murdered 3 teenagers in England between 1974 and 1976, took a ring off one of the victims and gave it to his girlfriend. That's a trophy. A souvenir is similar, but different. It's a special token taken and then prized away to be seen and remembered only by the killer as part of their private fantasy world, according to Walter's study. The BTK did this. Joel Rifkin, who murdered 17 people, took everything from credit cards to jewelry to clothes, all of which helped in accounting for his murders. The person in the living room with us said the tokens that the rest stop killer took were most definitely souvenirs, something only for the killer's eyes, a prized collection to be viewed in secret only by him as a way to relive the fantasy of killing. These were not sexual homicides, but the sadism of the stomping and the watching of the drowning. It was close in a weird way. It was the thing that got him off. It was control and domination and fantasy all in one, and the souvenirs were part of it. There would be a collection kept well hidden, not displayed. Bob asked, How can you be sure? The person hesitated. They tried one word and then another, but finally bit their lip, unsure how to go on. Winnie offered Bob a gentle look. It was touching. She whispered, "Bob, the blood." The person nodded. Indeed, if the killer stomped on victims while they were fully clothed, there would be a lot of blood everywhere, especially on the clothes. You can't go around giving bloody clothing to loved ones. No, these were definitely secret souvenirs. Bob had enough. He wanted to know. In fact, we all did. The person thought it over for one last moment, as if unsure whether to share, or perhaps as if unsure how to unburden themselves of the secret after so many years. Finally, they said one word. Buttons. The person said, "The killer took buttons from each man." Well, and Margie too now. Bob immediately, almost instinctively, turned his head to the fireplace mantel, to the photo of Tommy. We all did. A silence fell on the room. I had forgotten just how handsome Tommy was. In the photo, he was leaning against the hood of a Ford Mustang parked in front of his auto shop on Cherry Street. This was the first day after buying the shop. He was so proud. Bob was his first customer. Big smile, nice hair. He looked so happy, so cool. He wore a blue members-only jacket and a pair of Jordache jeans, his favorite. I could practically read Bob's thoughts as he stared at the smiling image of his bright, happy boy with such a bright, happy future ahead of him in that photo. Find that button, and you'll find the killer. The person with us said something else. They said, "We believe the killer used sewing shears that he carried with him. In the initial murders in the 1990s, the cuts were clean and neat and orderly, not jagged like you'd find with a knife. He used these shears to cut away the buttons." Winnie asked, "How can you be sure they were actually sewing shears?" I knew where she was going with this. Roger Kibbe, the I-5 strangler, used his mother's sewing shears to cut away irregular shapes and patterns from his victim's clothes, like some macabre revenge fantasy enacted against his mother. You might remember this guy. He dumped the body of his first victim at Lake Berryessa. But why sewing shears? If, unlike Ed Kemper, he couldn't kill his own mother, I guess he could at least take out some internal revenge fantasy with her shears. These guys are so fucking weird, man. But he was captured in 1988, years before the Ridgewood murders. The person with us said the cuts were too clean for a knife or even regular scissors. Only sewing shears could do this. The police said they think the rest stop killer might also be playing out some violent revenge fantasy against their parents, either their mom or dad, but most likely their mom given gender roles and seamstresses. How's that Larkin poem go? They fuck you up, your mom and dad. They may not mean to, but they do. They fill you up with all their faults and add some extra just for you. He could have been talking about serial killers. Bob cleared his throat and said, "You said there was something else." The person said Margie's button from her pants was also taken, but not with sewing shears. With a knife maybe, or maybe regular scissors. The cuts were too jagged and unclean. The person said, "We think it might have been the same knife used to stab her neck and incapacitate her. It's just a guess." So there you have it. Buttons. The rest stop killer had taken jeans or pants buttons from each victim, and if we can find that collection, we'd have our man. You may be wondering why I'm telling you all this. Didn't I promise not to reveal this information until after the killer was captured, under a sworn promise of ethics to our source in this case and justice, and also under the threat of bodily harm from Bob Coulee? Indeed. We met at Bob's house that Saturday morning. The person departed through the back door. Bob went quiet, lingering by the photo of his boy with his wide grin and stylish Jordache jeans, and I headed out to call Nikki. Winnie went back to the office, saying she had some digging to do. We didn't know it at the time, but across town, at this very same moment our meeting was breaking up, the killer was already staking out the next victim in this case. We didn't know it, but it would be the last, and the killer would be identified that very night. Next time on Crime Adjacent, the killer grabbed her at the gym, the parking lot, just like what happened with Margie Miller at the grocery store. But just like what happened with Margie Miller, there were no cameras to record anything. Detective Jones said her theory about a copycat was put to the test, not just because the same button was also taken from this new victim, but because whoever had taken these new victims knew the town well, just like the original killer. The roadways, the stores, the streets, where there were cameras, where there were not, it had to be the same guy. Jones said, "This killer was too practiced, and I was beginning to wonder at the time if our only hope of catching him was if he made a mistake." Indeed, the killer did make a mistake that Saturday night. They left something behind in the parking lot, and it would, finally, lead to the arrest of Daniel Palmer Jr. If you enjoy these stories and want immediate access to behind-the-scenes content, sign up for free updates and bonus information at our Patreon page, patreon.com/crimeadjacent, or check us out on Instagram. Until next time, this is Chase Patrick from San Francisco with the reminder, stay tuned. You'll never unhear what happens next.